The Further Education of OverSoul 7 by Jane Roberts, read by Martin John. Chapter 14. Lydia attends a seance, shocks the sitters, and keeps a promise. It's Roger. Roger, can you hear me? Lydia spun around. She heard the voice, but she saw no one. If you can hear us, give us a sign. The voice, if that's what it was, Lydia thought, came out of nowhere as far as she was concerned. She heard it, but didn't hear it at the same time. That is, the voice seemed composed of a small mountain of sounds in some dim distance, and if she turned her attention in that direction, then she felt the sounds stacked up there, falling down into soundlessness or building up again. She couldn't tell which, when somehow she felt the words. She'd just been thinking of Roger, her husband, trying to recall their life together. So maybe this was a message of sorts from him, she thought. Yet again, the name and the voice didn't seem to go together. It's Roger Jr., Lydia's living son said for the 10th time, following the medium's directions and feeling like a damned fool. The candlelight flickered on the fringed table covering, touching the gilt-framed picture of Christ on the nearest knick-knack-filled shelf, dancing on the edge of his sister Anna's huge diamond ring, and on the little gold bell that sat at the medium's fingertips. Roger's eyes followed the candlelight as it flickered from object to object. He shifted his weight in the straight-back chair. He was tired of the whole affair, and he'd come only because he had promised Anna that he would. The vibrations are changing, the medium, Miss Always, said. She swayed gently. Her voice changed timbre. Roger looked at the glittering reflections again. They made Christ look cross-eyed, he thought nervously. Call her name again, Anna whispered, in a small spooky voice. She remembered playing with a Ouija board once as a child, when the pointer suddenly went speeding across the board, seemingly all by itself. Whether it was all bunk, as Roger said, or not, one never knew. One never knows, she whispered. The medium said, Think, concentrate, close your eyes and try to see your mother in your mind's eye. Roger did. He saw the bony finger, the boyish frame at about 70, the intense, ironic eyes, the tailored suit she wore when she gave poetry readings. He saw her in the dungarees she used to wear most of the time, and he saw her running off with that man. What was his name? Lawrence somebody, when she was past 70. Christ, he tried to squash the image of the two bony old bodies making love in a trailer alcove. He was still scandalized by the whole affair. She's here! Your mother's here! I can always feel it, Miss Always said. She meant it. She wasn't lying. Her thoughts unwound like pink girlish ribbons, garnishes of sentimentality twirling on them everywhere. She believed wholeheartedly and with grim determination in mother love as the strongest force on earth, or anywhere else for that matter. And now she was convinced that she felt that force materializing. She listened inwardly. She sweated, an indignity gladly accepted for the sake of such a worthy task. And finally she saw a mental image. She whispered, "I see her, your mother, in a lovely blue gown. She's standing to the left, over there. She says, 'Give my dear son my love, Roger, I'm with you still.'" Miss Always' misty, half-closed eyes lit on Roger's face so that he tried to freeze his expression into an acceptable one for the occasion. "Your mother says that your father's is here too," Miss Always said. "And so you see, true love is reunited." She and father never got along," Roger muttered. He wanted to ask, "What about the old reprobate that she took off with at an age when she should have known better? Is he there too?" But his sister, Anna, said in a small girlish voice, "Mama, is it really you?" Roger blushed uncomfortably. His sister was past 50, for God's sake, and she hadn't called Lydia Mama since she was a girl. "Is it really you?" Anna asked. She knew it wasn't, she told herself, but suddenly she felt very forlorn and childlike, overweight and dyed red hair to the contrary, and the room seemed depressing and sad in contrast to the medium's face, which was filled with saintly innocence that she certainly wasn't faking. Was she? "Your mother says that she and your father are both happy," Miss Always said. "Your mother is standing by me now. A man is with her. He's medium-sized, with white hair and blue eyes. Is that your father?" "No, he died quite young," Roger said meanly. "Oh, well, maybe he's your mother's father. Even mediums can't always be sure. He died of a severe illness." Christ, most people do, Roger thought. He was ready to get up and leave. "He worked in leather." "Yes, that's it," Miss Always said. Roger and Anna both gasped. Anna grabbed her lace handkerchief and buried her face into it. It was drenched with perfume, and the scent made Roger sneeze violently. "Oh dear, do be still," Miss Always cried. "You'll ruin the vibrations." Roger was white-faced and almost sick to his stomach. "Tell us more about the man," he said, looking meaningfully at Anna, who was horrified. It would be doubly scandalous, she thought, for her dead mother's elderly lover to turn up at a seance. But he did work in leather. She remembered perfectly that he'd upholstered the trailer Love Nest when he and Lydia ran off. "Oh, it couldn't be him," Anna whispered. Miss Always knew that she'd really hit upon something, but she didn't know what it was. The word leather had just come to her out of nowhere. Neither of the sitters looked very happy about the connection, though. The man was glowering, and the stout woman looked scared to death. "I sense a great love, a love that lasts beyond the grave," she said shrewdly, hopefully. "Oh," cried Anna, Anything else? Roger asked. He was beginning to collect himself again. A long journey, Miss Always said. She was growing tired. She was never sure where her impressions came from. Some were conscious guesses, but some definitely had a different source. Roger grumped. Was that a lucky guess, or did it really refer to the cross-country journey with the old man and woman, half out of their blessed minds, on their last wicked binge? She's leaving. Everything is getting dim, Miss Always said. Goodbye, dear lady. Your 2 children ask that you remember them, she said to the ceiling. Children, Lydia thought. That was it. Out of curiosity, she followed the voices that seemed to act like steps down inverted corridors with endless mirrors, until she emerged into this room. With surprise, she saw that she was indeed on Earth, obviously after her own death, but the rest of the proceedings at first were incomprehensible. 2 of the people looked very familiar, and from the dialogue she'd overheard, these must be her children, Anna and Roger. But they were older than she remembered. Next to them, invisibly, she was a jaunty 25, or maybe even 35, and she was wondering whether or not to be born again as a baby. Lydia stared and tried to bring herself into the environment more clearly. There's something over there, Anna cried. I swear it. Don't move, Miss Always whispered. In fact, the medium nearly sprang out of her chair, for in a flash she saw Lydia quite clearly in one of the few legitimate psychic experiences of her lifetime. So seances worked, Lydia thought, catching on. When she was alive, she wouldn't have been caught dead at one. Miss Always was pointing at her. Her face contorted. Roger was shouting something, and Anna was crying in her handkerchief. The relationships were so complex that Lydia wanted to laugh and cry at once. Yet she related from her own present. It was almost impossible for her to find the part of her that meant so much to these 2 middle-aged people. They'd never really been close. Had they forgotten? Over there! I see something over there! Anna shouted to Roger. Miss Always cried out, You've left the physical plane! You're dead! Rest in peace, dear soul! I know I'm dead, Lydia shouted, but no one heard her. There isn't anything there, or anyone. It's all your imagination, Roger said. I don't hear or see anything. That figures, Lydia muttered, thoroughly disgusted. Oh, Mama, Anna cried. And this time when Lydia heard Anna's voice, the room shimmered. The walls and tables and people turned into flying fragments of strained little glass-like jigsaw images that rearranged themselves until a new picture was formed. Now Anna was 5 and Roger was 12, and they were in the living room, playing, on some heretofore-forgotten spring evening. The white curtains were blowing in the wind. A dog howled outside, and the sweet, damp night odor rushed through the open window. Where do the dead go, Mama? Anna asked, and Lydia saw herself, the young mother, with her children at her feet, and she felt stabs of tenderness. "The dead go everywhere, honey," Lydia, the young mother, said. But Roger stood up suddenly, his earnest face filled with rage, with the deep, inexpressible passion of a child. He shouted, "You're just saying that, but it isn't true. When you're dead, you aren't people anymore. Dead people don't really come back, like sometimes in the movies. It's scary." Then it seemed to Lydia, the young mother, that the night itself waited, that everything waited for her answer to the child, as if the question itself had implications she only felt but didn't understand. She said clearly, lightly smiling, "I'll come back years from now, when I'm dead, and tell you all about it when I know more. Okay?" As she said the words, Lydia, the young mother, shivered and glanced at her son. Did he smile slyly? Did the child send the mother out ahead of time where he would be afraid to go? Awful thoughts, she told herself, as the mother still remembered by the grown children. And now Lydia thought that it was those children lingering in the adults who still asked the question, and for whom she'd momentarily returned. Roger said, "Promise?" Frightened, biting his lips, feeling his new youth rising in the suburban night. "Promise," Lydia, the young mother, said. "I'll believe it when I see it," answered young Roger, just as the middle-aged Roger said the same thing. Lydia stared. She was back in the seance room. The medium was passing small glasses of wine to Anna and Roger, and they were excitedly discussing the evening's events. No one sensed her presence this time at all. Broodingly, she took on the old woman image she had died with. She tried hard to tug at her memories. It was like putting someone else's thoughts on. But finally she managed to sort out from all of her other experiences the one Lydia they seemed to be talking about. And from that standpoint she responded to the conversation. She saw them now as through a mist, Roger and Anna sipping the wine, gazing into the nervous face of Miss Always, who was more shaken than she wanted to admit. "Your mother must have been extraordinary. I've never sensed such a presence. Oh, I'm still nervous. I saw her so clearly." She fanned herself with her hand. "I've seen many, many aspirations." Her voice trailed off. With a sinking in her stomach, she realized that the others had all been imaginative images, because she wanted to see so badly. "I just hope she finds peace," she said quickly. "She never particularly looked for peace when she was alive," Roger said glumly. "She was unconventional, a rebel until the last. I guess she enjoyed showing us how dull we were by contrast." "That's not nice to say about her," Anna cried, looking around nervously. Lydia stared at their faces. She loved them enough, she saw, but she judged them too harshly. Her poetry, and later Lawrence, had been her life. And as she thought that, she suddenly saw Joseph's face in her mind's eye, and his daughter. She'd have to relate emotionally. She imagined herself as a child in the middle of his bustling household. "Do you think she's still around?" Anna asked, and Lydia said mentally, "Goodbye, dear Anna, dear Roger. I kept my promise. Forgive me for liking you better as children." Why couldn't Anna show some flair? Why couldn't Roger display just a touch of gallantry? Why, she broke the thoughts off, struck by a new realization. The conversation with the children about life after death had taken place one spring night after she met Lawrence. She returned home rather guiltily after a secret meeting with him. She'd met him downtown, supposedly by chance, but actually by prearrangement. And suddenly she was downtown. The seance room was gone. No one saw her. It was 6 p.m. by the town hall clock. It took Lydia a moment to orient herself, and longer to discover whether or not she was really walking down the world's streets. It was windy. Some people went by bundled in scarfs and coats, and cold. Lydia shivered, though she didn't feel the crisp air or the wind. Traffic zoomed by. Newspapers and debris blew in the gutters, and watching, she felt very lonely. She saw everything clearly, but she didn't really smell anything, she noticed. And she only heard the traffic sounds dimly, though cars rushed by just feet away. She didn't feel any particular sense of contact with the ground either, though nostalgically she remembered how the click-click-click of her high heels used to accompany her wherever she went, or the soft pouncing jaunts of sneakers, or... She really felt, well, ghostly, for the first time since her death. Was this OverSoul 7's way of making her feel uncomfortable, so she'd want to be born again? Though she didn't sense his presence, Lydia wasn't sure just how many of her experiences were the natural results of her own thoughts, or how many were directed by 7. She sighed petulantly. Her search for the gods had certainly been cut short. Here she was, earthbound enough. People were all around her, busy, concentrating completely in their cozy time and place, with appointments to keep, and with the arrangement of events so neat and simple. Despite herself, Lydia grinned. Without even noticing it, she'd turned back into a woman in her late 30s. She'd never realized before how little of herself was available when you were alive. In life, you didn't have to worry about balancing youth's energy and innocence with the wisdom experience of age. Because by the time you get old, you'd lost touch with your own youth. Now she could switch back and forth at will. A mixed blessing, she thought, because she passed a store window and saw that she left no reflection there. Yet peevishly she refused to focus all of her energy where she was, in which case she would be able to really smell and feel the air, hear the traffic. But that would be a mockery. A mockery of what? Between ages, Lawrence had said. She sighed again, and suddenly she realized that she was being followed. Being followed? She started to laugh, her unseen image flickering back and forth and changing colors with the extent of her mirth. Who could be following her here? She turned to see Lawrence several feet away, pretending to look in a shop window. Dear God, opera cape and all, and as insubstantial to others as she was. Until she saw him, she only sensed that she'd been lonely. Now she realized that she felt completely cut off, and no sooner did she see him than at once the entire scene burst into full brilliance so quickly that she leapt back in astonishment. The squeaks and squeals of the traffic, the cutting chill of the wind, and all the scents and sounds of the street came alive with a vengeance. It seemed an assaulting vividness. Automatically, Lydia hallucinated a hat, coat, and scarf, and Lawrence was beside her, smiling. "You're a real bitch to track down," he said, looking about 25. As he did when she first knew him, 15 years younger than she. Dark hair mused in the wind, opera cape blowing. "Larry, that cape," she said, laughing, and time collapsed where the edges of it met, and the two of them actually were alive and meeting secretly. He dressed for his part in the play, on his way to rehearsal, and she supposedly at the library. He kissed her quickly, excitedly. "How do you like my garb? I'm supposed to commit suicide in it. Can't you see my cape fluttering as I leap to my death? Some part. Maybe I should just concentrate on my crafts and leather work. Open up a shop, and forget this acting nonsense." "You look utterly fantastic," she cried. She was dizzy with exuberance, and the two of them stood there, so vital in each other's attention that nothing else mattered. In that moment, Lydia had access to everything that had been in that earlier Lydia's mind, so that in blinding rapidity she was almost overwhelmed by emotions and a series of images. First she felt her love for Lawrence as he stood before her. Then she saw the evening they'd later spent together, the small restaurant, red and white tablecloth, dinner, the candles and wine. She heard their own excited chatter, and felt her own worry about the two children left at home with the sitter. Last of all, a rush of guilt assaulted her because her husband, Roger, who was on a brief business trip, thought she was at home. And with the guilt, the instant burst. She and Lawrence, two insubstantial images, stood facing each other on the busy twilight street with people passing by, not seeing them. "Oh," Lydia whispered. Lawrence said, "We were going to go away together after the play closed. You can recall all of it if you want." "Do you remember?" she asked. He nodded. "I'm here to help you revive your memories, if you want to. You seem to close them out. She said slowly, You never did make it as an actor, and you did end up with a leather shop. There's something else, he said. The meeting we just re-experienced was the last time we saw each other for about 20 years. She just stared at him. You even considered suicide once, he said, not looking at her. Suicide? Why? Not me, not in a million years, she exclaimed. Tell me, what have I forgotten? But Lawrence was gone, and the environment itself was disappearing. In Chapter 14, Peace, Light, and Love. Aloha.